But I want to thank Dr. Ghosh and really the entire New Mexico Solar Energy Association for inviting me today. I actually got to connect yesterday with the Solar Energy Industries Association. So it's sort of a perfect segue. And I'm really looking forward to discussing the state of our state's clean energy economy and some of the exciting prospects for climate policy and energy policy in this Congress. As Dr. Ghosh mentioned, my interest in this really started in the 1990s as a young mechanical engineering student with much longer hair at the University of Missouri-Columbia. And it was very instructive for me to be part of a team where we all brought our skill sets together and designed and built a carbon fiber solar car called the Sun Tiger that we raced from Dallas to Minneapolis. And while my particular assignment was to design the suspension for that car, the entire experience really opened my eyes to the possibilities for solar energy generation and actually energy efficiency as well, because I think we used to drive that car about 30 miles an hour on what the energy that your morning microwave or your morning hair dryer would produce or consume. So it shouldn't really come as a surprise that I've had rooftop solar on my house in Albuquerque since the early 2000s. And today's clean energy economy really represents one of New Mexico's greatest opportunities to attract capital and create careers in literally every corner of our state. Throughout my time in the House and Senate, even back in the days when I was on the Albuquerque City Council, I've tried to focus my attention on how we can advance investments in research, development, and deployment of clean energy technologies, both to grow this industry in our great state and to meet the climate crisis that really threatens our land and water and our children's futures. So I'm proud that literally one of my first votes in Congress was on the 2009 Recovery Act that really kickstarted the tax incentives that have grown the renewables industry and brought down prices to where solar is now the cheapest form of energy on the grid. And in 2015, and again at the end of last year, I was proud to help secure extensions of these clean energy tax credits that have proven to be such a successful and valuable federal tool for encouraging the construction of renewables projects. The year-end agreement that we just did in December, it included a one-year extension of the production tax credit for onshore wind projects, a new 5-year expansion of the PTC for offshore wind projects. And I think we're going to see an enormous growth in offshore wind in this administration, and a 2-year extension for the investment tax credits for residential and commercial solar. It included one other thing that's worth just mentioning. It included refrigerants language or hydrofluorocarbons language that's valued at about 0.5 degrees C of prevented additional warming, which is just an enormous accomplishment when you think about what we need to do to stay within the bounds of what's reasonable for our planet. In addition, I'm working to build on this concept with bipartisan legislation that I just introduced with Senator Susan Collins to extend the investment tax credit to energy storage. Deploying more energy storage is essential to reach the kind of clean energy penetration and balancing on our grid that we're going to need as we transition to a zero carbon economy. And over the last few years, storage technology has come down in price dramatically. Storage also provides a whole host of services to the grid, and the Energy Storage Tax Incentive and Deployment Act would supercharge the deployment of our storage on our grid and would apply to both distributed applications as well as utility scale applications. And I really think that in a few years, most rooftop solar installations are going to be paired with on-site storage and really be able to function as distributed energy resources. As we scale up the use of new battery and other storage technologies and encourage new utility scale wind and solar projects to be wind plus storage or solar plus storage projects, we can drive down energy costs and enhance resilience and reliability for customers. Our storage ITC bill follows the successful passage at the end of the year of the Better Energy Storage Technology, or BEST Act, and that new law will greatly accelerate research and development and implementation of energy storage systems. And that last part is really key, especially as President Joe Biden and members of Congress begin to look for the best ways to put Americans back to work through a 21st century Build Back Better infrastructure package. I strongly believe that we need to place substantive climate action and deployment of clean and carbon-free infrastructure at the top of the list for goals for that package. Modernizing America's infrastructure for the 21st century necessarily means preparing for and adapting to the new climate reality. It means opportunities for new high-quality careers in the building trades, and that work includes preparing our roads, our water systems, all of our energy infrastructure for the kind of extreme weather events that we just witnessed in Texas and across, to some degree, even in New Mexico, although we were better prepared for it. We also need to build a lot more charging stations for the growing number of electric vehicles on our roads, while we simultaneously ramp up our efforts to electrify our government vehicle fleets. On that note, we should be thinking about how we can incentivize more businesses, more homeowners to electrify not just light transport, not just their vehicles, but their water heaters, their gas range stoves, their furnaces. And in short, one of the fundamental central strategies to solve the climate crisis is the electrification of nearly everything that we do with combustion today. Now, there are a few exceptions, but you think about all of the space heating, all of the water heating, all of even the cook ranges. By electrifying our economy and the buildings where we live and work, we can improve our quality of life, and we can dramatically reduce health risks related to indoor air quality. The inherent efficiency of electric solutions means we can solve climate change a lot faster than most of my colleagues realize or believe. And we can save money and grow jobs doing it. Jobs installing solar panels, jobs for plumbers installing heat pump water heaters, jobs manufacturing wind turbines, and jobs in construction in maintaining generation facilities. Really high quality jobs in the trades. And literally, as we electrify our economy, that's going to mean tens of millions of jobs across our country. We should also be investing in the development and demonstration of carbon-free hydrogen technology to create feedstocks for some of those really heat-intensive industrial processes and the places that we can't yet electrify. These types of technologies and alternative fuels are going to be key to some of those last to reach, hardest to decarbonize sectors. And finally, we need to focus on what we need to do to site and build more connectivity, more transmission lines and smart grid technologies like power controls that allow power onto the existing transmission infrastructure. Transmission's the thing that has the potential to really reshape and modernize our electric grid. New transmission lines like Western Spirit, for example, in New Mexico that just broke ground earlier this year will change the map, the energy map and the landscape in our state. They create new pathways that will allow much more renewable carbon-free power generation to reach the places where the highest demand is. And that one small transmission line, it creates 1,000 construction jobs, and it puts dozens of permanent technicians in careers in rural communities in parts of the state that haven't really seen this kind of local investment, sometimes since the railroad came to town. And once it's online, it's going to allow us to build 4 new wind projects that, when linked together, make up the largest single-phase wind development in American history right here in our state. So that's just a little bit of what New Mexico's leadership in the clean energy economy looks like. but it'll take a concerted communications and policy effort from the federal and even especially to the state and local level to be able to transition our economy fast enough to meet our emissions requirements. And I chose to use the words emissions requirements intentionally. I say requirements because these aren't really goals. This is physics. If we blow past 2 degrees C, we really risk destroying the stable planet, the stable climate that has given rise to our civilization and treated the human race so well. Before we get to questions, and I'm looking forward to those, I'd like to close by emphasizing just how proud I am of how New Mexico is leaning in this transition. This is not going to be easy. It certainly won't come without costs, particularly for many of our fellow New Mexicans who have long worked to power our economy and supported their families with careers in traditional fossil fuel industries. And I'm grateful to those hardworking New Mexicans. And even as we pursue this transition, it's critical that we do not leave those workers behind. I was proud to see the New Mexico legislature pass not only the Energy Transition Act last year, but the Climate Solutions Act in the most recent session to make sure that we're planning for a future with clear eyes about the challenges and the opportunities that we all face. And I'm committed to working with folks in our state and in the Biden administration, like Secretary Holland and our new Energy Secretary, Jennifer Granholm, to develop place-based strategies and steer investments to support New Mexico's transition. When I think about all this, I always remember my dad, who was an IBW utility lineman, and the wages and benefits that he earned by maintaining power lines and keeping our communities lights on, by going out in the middle of thunderstorms to fix those power outages. Those are the things that put myself and my sister through college. And that job really was a ticket to the middle class for our family. And I think it's going to be a lot of blue collar energy workers like my dad who are going to be most impacted by this transition, but they can also be the tradesmen, the tradeswomen who will build up our new clean energy economy. And despite the friction points that will come about as part of this transformation, and in many cases, because of those friction points, there will be so much work to do as we confront the climate crisis. So many of these new jobs are going to be, and in many cases already are, in our state's thriving solar industry. We have the potential to create thousands more installing energy storage, changing out fossil gas stoves, water heaters, furnaces, with clean solutions like air source heat pumps and induction ranges. Our potential is clear and our future is really bright. If we make the right choices now, we have the opportunity to put our state, to put New Mexico in the best possible position to thrive in the new energy landscape. And I want to say thanks again for giving me a platform today and the opportunity to have a conversation about something that's so central to our state's economy and to our future.
Thank you, Senator Heinrich. That was excellent. You clearly understand the problems and have a grip on the solutions. We have 9 questions that were submitted. The first one, what strategies do you think will best support New Mexico's economic transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy?
Well, I think investments in continuing to grow our workforce and making sure that we can not just have a single strategy, but think about this holistically. How do we continue to develop utility scale solar and really take advantage of that and use that as an export product so that we can export electrons and import dollars into the state? And at the same time, pay attention to our distributed jobs on rooftop solar, on, rooftop solar I see as sort of the gateway, what do you call it, like a appliance. After the solar, you start thinking about the batteries and resilience. You realize that you're burning a bunch of gas inside your home. where frankly, all the new data suggests we shouldn't be using gas ranges, especially unvented, that's really a dangerous situation. And then you're putting in a air source heat pump water heater. And you're just thinking differently about how you power all these things. You're putting in a 240 charger for fast charger for an electric vehicle when you turn over your car. And so I think thinking in all of those things simultaneously and not thinking it's going to be a silver bullet. It's really, my friend Angus King from Maine, he likes to say there's no silver bullet, but there is silver buckshot. And I think that's kind of the approach that we ought to take in New Mexico.
Thank you. The next question, what federal programs coming through the Biden administration could particularly benefit New Mexico?
Well, my hope is that we may be able to get some fairly comprehensive things through this process. And it's not clear yet whether it's going to be a reconciliation process or a more consensus-driven sort of 60-vote traditional process. But if it's reconciliation, there are limits to what you can do on a policy basis. So there are advantages and disadvantages to both. I think we should be looking at a clean energy standard to drive the electric sector, but that really helps us decarbonize some of those corners of the country that aren't already on the path to zero carbon the way that we finally are in the state of New Mexico. But we also have to think about those other sectors. I mean, we make cement in New Mexico. It's incredibly energy intensive. There are alternatives there, but if we had a carbon fee in place, that would really drive down and drive towards cleaner technologies. And we could use those revenues to invest in our traditional fossil communities that need to weather this transition, and all of those frontline minority communities that have really suffered the effects of pollution the longest. So those are some of the big things. There's also a whole bunch of little things that you can just do through tax policy and through investment in infrastructure. From charging infrastructure in rural areas that opens up whole swaths of the state to being able to utilize electric vehicles, to investments that help make it easier to finance things like transmission. Once we have some more substantive transmission between us and the markets to the west of us, that opens up billions of dollars in new investment in generation. So we're going to be looking at all of those things. We've got a lot of different pieces and parts on transmission, on electrification, on trying to create incentives for individual home and building owners to be able to make some of those changes I talked about. And if we can get a solid infrastructure bill across the finish line, I think it could be an enormous game changer for the United States leadership position on climate. And it would be just in time to pivot back to where we need before the Secretary of State has to go to Glasgow and represent us on the world stage after being AWOL on these issues for 4 years.
Thank you. Next question. Would you be interested in co-sponsoring and strengthening Senate Bill 477, the Climate Change Education Act?
I'm actually talking with the lead sponsor of that right now. It hasn't been reintroduced, but we intend to join when it is reintroduced, and we're having those conversations now.
Okay. What kind of research could UNM and other New Mexico universities do that would help prepare students for climate change in New Mexico and diversify New Mexico's economy?
So I think at the leadership level, we need to elevate climate and energy as an issue. And so among regents, among university presidents, right now, these things tend to live in a department or in the hands of some individual passionate folks in various departments, in the engineering department or in the sustainability department. This needs to be a cross-cutting effort that starts with leadership And then the leadership supports the activities in all of our departments. In our, what we do with building plants is the beginning, and then having, tasking our students, especially in their graduate work, to take on individual hard to solve problems. That's the stuff that I think, you look back at the whole generation that was inspired by the astronauts, by the trip to the moon, by the space program as a whole. That was so inspiring, and we can make climate that sort of a fulcrum for an entire generation of students.
Thank you. That's great. Next question. Residential solar systems can be cost prohibitive to some homeowners. What is the government doing to help more homeowners shoulder the costs of residential solar installation?
Couple of things there. One is the investment tax credit. Two, I'm working on legislation to reduce the soft costs of solar, because if you look at the permitting, the installation costs here in the United States, and you compare them to, say, Australia, we are 2 to 3 times more in those soft costs per watt. And that's a huge problem, but it's also a giant opportunity to reduce the cost of rooftop solar. So we've been working with NREL and with other industry partners to try to figure out a template for sort of creating some menus of, if you meet all these requirements as a municipality, you can go and just sort of pull an off-the-shelf approach to permitting that stuff that's well established, that's safe, that's tested, that meets all the things that you want your constituents to know you've checked. And then you don't have to do all that homework yourself. And to the extent that we can do that, make permitting faster, make permitting easier, without giving up any of the safety, that will be a huge incentive.
Yeah.
And I do think, solar is cheaper than everything else now. One of the challenges is just the financing of it, because if you have to pay for the whole system up front and you're a low income family, that's not feasible. But oftentimes, if you do have financing available, so much of the innovation has happened through financing mechanisms that let you trade a really bad electric bill for a better electric bill with solar, knowing where you're getting your electrons.
Right, and we recently did pass the Community Solar Act here in New Mexico, which will help us towards this goal that you...
Especially people who can't put solar on their roof, right? I mean, being able to buy into one of those projects for renters, for so many people, that opens up a whole new market.
Okay, next question. Will you, as our senator, champion the Green New Deal with real goals which really keep us from the climate calamity?
Well, that's why I'm so excited about the electrification of everything. And the projects that we're seeing now, we're working with groups like Rewiring America, because it's sort of the next step from the Green New Deal. It's the engineering that gets us to our climate requirements. And I'm working on legislation to have a resolution that talks about that. Resolutions are great, but now we're already starting to draft the actual implementation pieces of how do we electrify and clean up our homes? How do we do that for our commercial businesses? How do we transition transportation? And how do we make the investments we need to make to change steel, cement, glass, aviation, heavy marine, all of those really tough sectors? How do we clean those up? Because those we are going to be the last, but they're some of the hardest, and we need to come up with those solutions, change those supply chains and feedstocks. And we have to start that process now if we're going to get there on such a short time frame.
Okay, can I ask a few more questions? 3 more questions? Ashok?
Yeah, I've got 7 more minutes here. So
okay, so next question, I'll ask them quickly. What federal legislation could reduce the balkanization of utilities and incentivize all utilities and co-ops to fast track decarbonization?
So I think the clean energy standard is probably the biggest lever that we could have there. And it's a performance-based standard. So it tends to have a really broad appeal. It seems to be something that the Biden administration is thinking a lot about. If we can get that into a reconciliation process, you never know until, because of how that would be structured, whether or not we could get, frankly, a favorable ruling from the parliamentarian that was fiscal and not policy. But we've been spending the better part of 6 months trying to construct that in a way that is all about dollars and cents, and not prescribing particular technologies to be able to meet those goals. So I'm hopeful on that front. I also think we need to revisit some of the work that was done 10 years ago to try and address some of this. To their credit, in the I'm trying to remember whether it was the 05 or the 07 energy bill. Senator Bingaman and Senator Domenici created a pathway for transmission to try and get some of these places connected. And there was a hostile court ruling that actually, I think, interpreted that completely different than either of them seemed to understand it when the debate on that bill happened. And so we need to fix some of those things. And I'm working on legislation to sort of revisit the FERC and get the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to look at some of those things and create a requirement that these interregional parties have to come together and work with each other, and that there's a process for fairly allocating the costs then between entities that have to connect.
Okay, next question. In 2013, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory conducted a feasibility study for a solar photovoltaic array at the Chino mine in Silver City. NREL determined the Chino mine site is suitable and financially feasible for a large-scale PV system that could produce 348 megawatts of electricity. Are you familiar with this ideal location, and is there anything you can do to help PNM and Freeport-McMoRan to facilitate a development plan?
So I was not familiar with this study before. What I would say is that I am familiar with a number of mining projects around the world that have found it very beneficial to do on-site solar. You need a partner that wants to do it, and I don't want to speak for Freeport-McMoRan, but I know that part of the state has great resources. I think one of the next steps that would be required would be to figure out what the interconnection situation is like, because our biggest challenge in New Mexico oftentimes is not, is there a good resource there? We have lots of good wind, we have lots of good solar, but then getting that connected to the grid and that interconnection approved.
Okay, there's one last question I have here. In this legislative session, there were a number of bills which addressed problems with fossil fuel use in New Mexico. Nearly all of these bills were prevented from moving through the committees sufficient to be voted on. In at least one case, a discussion of the bill was allowed by the fossil fuel industry, and the public was not allowed to weigh in. Our legislation is heavily dominated by Democrats. Most of them receive funding from the fossil fuel industry. What do you think would be a good strategy for New Mexicans to take in order to have the power to protect ourselves from climatic, financial, and environmental health effects of this industry?
Well, I followed the session pretty closely. I probably am more involved in the session than historically most federal representatives have been willing to be. I'm really proud of some of the things that we were able to get across the finish line, like community solar, like the climate solutions resolution. But there are bottlenecks there, and there is no question about that. And, this is probably not the venue to discuss that, but the solutions to that are come around accountability. I think the vast majority, we saw an enormous amount of leadership in the Democratic members, especially the brand new members, really fighting hard for a clean future, and at the same time being respectful of the necessity of working with historic, workers who have really been our energy veterans, who spent their entire careers producing low-cost energy. But there are bottlenecks, and I think accountability is the solution for how you change some of those bottlenecks. And I won't mention any names, but I'm watching.
Thank you. And I think there may be people that have additional questions as you have any minutes. If not, then let us know. Yeah,
I'm going to have to run here, but I look forward to doing this again. I see Luis Torres is on the Zoom. Hello, Luis. I don't think I've seen you in years, so it was just really good to see your face pop up here. And thanks to all of you who are making this stuff happen. This is, you're literally working in the space that's going to make our future so much more livable and so much better. So thank you, and keep it up.
It's been delightful. Thank you so much for what you do, Senator Heinrich. We really admire you. And
round of applause for him. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, Senator.
From NMSEA and everybody here in this, all these little squares. We